This is problem 8 of the exam review worksheet, and in problem 8 we're given a state table and the state assignment, and we're supposed to construct the state assigned table and derive minimal Boolean expressions for the next state to be input to the flip-flops. If we look at this machine, we can see that the output depends only on what state it's in, and when the output depends only on what state it's in, it's a Moore machine, because it doesn't depend on, the output does not depend on the input. So we are going to change the state table to a state assigned table, and to do that we're going to just translate each of the A, B, C, and A, B, and C to their equivalents up here, 0, 0, 1, 1, and 1, 0. Now the first digit in each of these is we're going to call Q1, and the second digit we'll call Q2. So for A, Q1 is 0 and Q2 is 0. For B, Q1 is 1 and Q2 is 1. And for C, Q1 is 1 and Q2 is 0. So all we're going to do here is replace the A, B, and C with their equivalents up here. So A is 0, 0, so Q1 is 0, Q2 is 0. B is 1, 1, Q1 is 1, Q2 is 1. And C is 1, 0. Now these we're going to put in here the next state, and the next state depends on the input. So this would be Q1 star, Q2 star, and also Q1 star, Q2 star. So C is 1, 0, A is 0, 0, and B is 1, 1. A is 0, 0, B is 1, 1, and B is 1, 1. Okay, so now the output doesn't change, so that will just be 1, 1, 0. Now we are supposed to derive expressions for Q1 star, Q2 star, and W. So we'll do a Carnot map. So let's start with Q1 star. And Q1 star depends on Q1, Q2, and W. And we see that we have no state assigned to 0, 1, so those are don't cares. Okay, so now we are filling in the next state for Q1. So we're filling in this column and this column. So that's Q1 star, Q1 star. So Q1 star, when Q1, Q2 is 0, 0, and W is 0, so this is the row where W is 0. So we're going to fill that in now, and to get the row where W is 0, we're going to be looking at this column right here. Okay, so when W is 0 and Q1, Q2 is 0, 0, then Q1 star is 1. When W is 0 and Q1, Q2 is 0, 0, Q1 star is 0. When W is 0 and Q1, Q2 is 1, 0, then Q1 star is 1. So now we're going to get the values where W equals 1. So now we're looking at this column. So when W equals 1, Q1, when W equals 1, and Q1, Q2 equals 0, 0, Q1 star equals 0. When W equals 1 and Q1 star, and W equals 1 and Q1, Q2 equals 1, 1, Q1 star equals 1. And when W equals 1 and Q1 star equals 1, 0, then, I'm sorry, Q1, Q2 equals 1, 0, Q1 star equals 1. So here we have our Carnot map for Q1 star, and a good cover for it is right here. So this first group here, in that first group, this is Q1 star. Let's see, Q2 is always 0, so Q2 prime, and W is 0, so W prime. Or Q1 is 1, so Q1, and W is 1. So Q1 star is Q2 prime W prime plus Q1 W. Okay, so now it's time to get Q2 star. Okay, so Q2 star. Also depends on Q1, Q2, and W. And like before, we don't have a state assigned to 0, 1, so that'll be a don't care. And now we're looking at column 2, because that's Q2 star. So when W is 0 and Q1, Q2 is 0, 0, so Q1, Q2, 0, 0, W 0, Q2 star is 0. When Q1, Q2 is 1, 1, and W is 0, then Q2 star is 0. When Q1, Q2 is 1, 0, and W is 0, then Q2 star will be 1. Now we'll go to W equals 1. So when W equals 1, then, and Q1, Q2 equals 0, 0, then Q2 star equals 0. When W equals 1 and Q1, Q2 equals 1, 1, then Q2 star equals 1. And when W equals 1 and Q1, Q2 equals 1, 0, then Q2 star equals 1. So now we'll get a cover for this. And we get that Q2 star equals, let's see, in this column, Q1 is 1 and Q2 is 0, so that would be Q1, Q2 prime. And in this group, Q1 is always 1, and W is always 1. So our expression for Q2 prime is Q1W plus, or Q1 Q2 prime plus Q1W. Now our output, as we mentioned before, does not depend on our input. So our Carnot map is going to be pretty simple. We just have Q1 and Q2, 0, 1, 0, 1. And there's no state assigned to 0, 1. And so 0, 1 would be right here. That's a don't care. And when Q1, Q2 is 0, 0, the output Z is 1. When Q1, Q2 is 1, 1, 1, 1, the output is 1. And when Q1, Q2 is 1, 0, the output is 0. So now a cover for this will be those. And so Z equals, in this column Q1 is 0, so that's Q1 prime. And in this column Q2, in this row Q2 is 1, so that's plus Q2. So the output Z equals Q1 prime plus Q2.